I spent probably close to an hour staring at the blood and the wounds, and I found myself really almost overcome by the whole thing. I actually felt my eyes beginning to water and began to really feel some sort of affection and realization that Christ did this for me.
Hey, I'm Guy Powell, and welcome to the next episode of the backstory on the Shroud of Turin. And if you haven't already done so, please visit guypowell.com and sign up for more episodes. As you know, I am the author of the book The Only Witness, which is a Christian historical fiction tracing a possible history of the Shroud over the last 2 millennia. Today, we're speaking with John Sottosanti, and he is a dental surgeon, a shroud researcher, and author of the book Mortal Adhesions. Let me tell you a little bit more about him specifically. So, John was a Southern California dental surgeon, a researcher and innovator in bone regeneration techniques, who's lectured internationally. Formerly agnostic and career driven, his life shifted in 1997 after visiting a Shroud of Turin research center and learning about the STIRP team's scientific findings. His curiosity led him to deeper spiritual exploration, recounted in his book Mortal Adhesions. He famously debated faith and science with an atheistic patient, Francis Crick, using the Shroud as an example. In 2000, an extended viewing of the Shroud of Turin in Turin profoundly moved him, shaping his enduring faith journey. What a wonderful history and how the Shroud brought you to faith. John, welcome. It's so good to have you.
Before we continue, I want to briefly tell you about my new book, The Only Witness. It's a work of Christian historical fiction rooted in years of serious research into the Shroud of Turin. The story traces what may have happened to the Shroud across 2,000 years of history through war, secrecy, faith, and survival. It puts you right into the story. If you're interested in the historical mystery behind the Shroud and its possible journey over the last 2 millennia, you can learn more and order your copy at guypowell.com or on Amazon. Now let's get back to the podcast.
Thank you, guys. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So I told a little bit about your backstory on the Shroud of Turin, but go ahead and give us a little more backstory on how you really got involved in the Shroud of Turin and maybe a little bit about your faith journey.
Okay. Well, I would say I was an agnostic, born into a Catholic family, but certainly when I went away to college, totally dropped the faith. And I was really into uh, accomplishing things, achieving things, possessing things like nice cars and nice houses. And I thought that I really didn't need God. Maybe I thought I was my own God. And then eventually things started happening when I realized I could not do without God. And God has a way when you turn to him, which I did. I said, God, if you're up there, all I really want to do is have inner peace because I was really experiencing some anxiety. And so things began happening. And one of the things that began was my wife and a friend talked me into going to Bible study. So that helped me there. And then somebody said, there's this Shroud of Turin Center in Southern California. I think Gus Sacetta, I think, is the one that set that up. And it was remarkable. So in 1997, I went to the center and I saw the Shroud replica out there. And then I saw the crown of thorns and I saw the Roman flagrum and I learned about the wounds and I learned about the STIRP team and the science, enough so that shortly thereafter, Francis Crick, you may know, many of the viewers may know that name because Watson and Crick discovered DNA, the DNA molecule. And Francis Crick, very famous, was my patient for 20 years. And so I would normally never have the courage to challenge him in anything scientific, but I actually brought up the Shroud of Turin. So that opened my eyes to that. And so what happened was 3 years later, the year 2000, which was a Jubilee year, there was a surgical meeting in Switzerland. And at the same time, I happened to see one of my wife's uh, uh, faith-based newsletters or magazines, and there was an ad or an article probably about the Shroud of Turin, and you could get tickets for seeing the shroud while you're over there. And I thought, well, if it only shows up a couple times a century, I might as well go ahead and get tickets. So I got a ticket, and I took a train ride all the way from Zurich in the morning. And that was like 3 hour ride. And I get to the church thinking I'll walk right in and see this thing. Well, the massive amounts of people, thousands lined up. And then we went through the queue, and I was told I'd have 4.5 minutes in front of the Shroud of Turin and keep moving is what I was told. So I get in the line, and I could, I get in the church, and I see the shroud on my right, and I turn to the right and try to look at it while I'm moving. And then I take the left-hand turn, and there was a whole bunch of people. The whole church was filled with probably locals and dignitaries and everything else. But right there in the second row, a seat on the aisle opened up, and I figured, why not? I sat down in it, waiting to be asked to leave, and nobody ever asked me. I could have spent the day there if I didn't have a train ticket to go back to Zurich. So I spent probably close to an hour staring at the blood and the wounds, and I found myself really almost overcome by the whole thing. I actually felt my eyes beginning to water and began to really feel some sort of affection and realization that Christ did this for me. And when I went home, I can't say I changed overnight, but the first thing I did was I bought a picture of the face on the shroud, and I put it up in the house. So for basically 20 years, I had that there. But I occasionally read articles on the shroud, but I certainly didn't study it. And then this past year in 2025, I heard about an international shroud symposium. And I had also been asked by our local Catholic radio station if I would take a training course that they would provide on the shroud, because they wanted to make an exhibit, which they had purchased, available to local parishes, and they wanted me to be one of the speakers. So I did take that training, and I did start doing that. So when I saw that there was an international conference, I signed up for it, and I enjoyed the talks, and it was quite a great experience. The interesting thing happened. God has a way of making things happen at the right time. And so it was the end of the conference. Everybody had left, but maybe two people. It was me and Joe Marino. And I didn't know Joe Marino, except that when he was chair of the conference, or the moderator, I certainly got to know who he was. And we began talking. And I said, Joe, I'm a retired oral surgeon, and I noticed that there's something around the oral region that I've noticed that I don't think anybody's mentioned. And he said, well, go back and get a high resolution photo, which you can get online. So I got Vernon Miller's. And he said, study it. And if you think you see something, write it up. And he told me how to do that and get it published on, we did it on academia.edu and got it published. And I also wrote an op-ed piece, and it was picked up by the Blaze. And then I got on Newsmax national TV about 2, 3 months ago for the discovery. So it's been an exciting couple of months. And it all started
Fantastic.
just the way I told you about.
It's amazing how God nudges you and then pushes you a little harder and whatever, but it really is amazing. Thank you for that. So now you are a dental surgeon, and you've got I think 40 years experience, so you certainly know exactly what's going on in the mouth. And so you found some interesting things about what's going on there and what you can potentially see in the shroud. So tell us a little bit about the history of finding teeth in the shroud.
I did a little bit of a literature review, and basically it goes back to I think it was the 1980s. Um, there was a not by a dentist, it was actually an archaeological chemist who wrote a paper saying he thought he saw teeth on the shroud. And not much was said after that until the Wengers got involved, and they published their book I think it was 1998 on the Shroud of Turin. And I actually was able to get a hold of that and look at it. And I believe they claimed they could see 20 teeth, 10 uppers and 10 lowers, complete with roots. And then I saw a YouTube video that Gary Habermas, the New Testament or the scholar, actually quite well known and shroud expert. And Gary quotes somebody from Duke University who said, "Oh, yeah, I looked at that shroud image and I could see all 28 teeth with all the roots, and you could see it through the hair and all this stuff." And so I thought that was interesting. And so that's when I really began studying it closely. And I definitely disagreed. And eventually, in a few minutes, we'll actually go to some up close photos, and I'll do my best to explain it. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead right to that. Go ahead. Everybody's quite familiar with this. Now, the first thing I want to point out to you is if you look at the mustache, it's quite distinct, broad for vertical dimension is wide. We all know it's relatively thick mustache. And when you look at it, you see highlights. And let's look at the beard around the chin. You notice all the bright highlights. And some of that is the proximity, or all of it is, to the cloth itself. But there are highlights in various places that we don't know exactly why. Some of it's blood, and mustache itself. What you are seeing is almost like small white bullets. Do you want to put, yeah, right there. You see, and if you start counting those, you probably come up with at least 12 or 14 of them. Uh, I don't feel that those teeth are teeth at all. And I'll show you in a little bit once we get off screen sharing with a model how those teeth are too widely spread. They're not teeth. I mean, it's something else. It's probably what people do refer to as pareidolia. It's where the mind wants to see something, and it'll take sometimes extraneous information, like looking up at a sky with clouds and wanting to see an object, and looking up there saying, "Oh, I see it up there." And so that's what I really do have to agree with some of the shroud skeptics who have talked negatively against teeth. That what we're seeing is a combination of pareidolia. We're seeing kind of a luminosity, luminance that we're not 100% sure what caused it. And then we're seeing the vertical striations of the shroud. If you look at this photo, you will see countless vertical lines going up through the image. They're all over the place. And if you zoom in, which we will, get a little bit in a second, we'll look a little closer. You'll begin to see how that could be thought of as teeth. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, what I did here is I took this from Wenger's book. He has something called a polarized overlay image technique. And what he did was he took the photo positive of the shroud and the photo negative of the shroud, superimposed them on top of each other, then used a polarizing filter to draw out some anatomical structures. So he claimed that you could see all these teeth. Now, I beg to differ because what we see, it looks like full-size molar teeth. Well, if anybody wants to try this out, go to a mirror, not now, but later, smile in the mirror, and you will not see all your back teeth. You only see little tiny bits of them because of the curvature of the arch. When we get through the slides, I'm going to show a dental model that'll fully explain that. But if you look now, okay, Guy, point to the upper teeth on the left there. Yeah, okay, those are what he calls the upper teeth. Now, where are the lower teeth? Drop way down. Yeah, right around there. You notice a distance between the lower teeth and the upper teeth, dramatic. It's very big. Well, if you close the lower jaw, those lower teeth would not bite against the upper teeth. The upper teeth are too flared. They're not upper teeth. They're just being called upper teeth. Now let's look at the human skull, which is what he did. He split it and said, well, the shroud image using my technique looks very much like a human skull. Well, look, if you look at the upper teeth of the human skull, do you want to go ahead and point to those right there? And you notice there's about a 1/4 inch gap. Then you have the lower teeth. You can see how if the lower jaw were to close, those teeth would bite together. So that's normal. But the Wenger double overlay or the overlay technique does not show that. So what I did then is I took a photo, again, Vernon Miller's, and let's go to the next slide. Okay, on the left here, I cropped it somewhat just so we could concentrate. On the left there, of course, you could see the blood stain on the forehead, eyebrows, eyes, long nose, and then below the long nose, you see almost rectangular, large mustache. Again, with the highlights that I talked about. But if you look very carefully, you will see multiple vertical strands running from the chin to the nose and beyond. And those are all cloth striations. And that is what many people have confused to be teeth. But what I noticed was something was in the right place and very anatomically correct. And I call it the incisal plane. And what the incisal plane is, well, let me back up a little bit. In dentistry, if you've gone to the dentist, you may have heard the word occlusion. How is your occlusion? That's how your teeth bite together. So the occlusal plane, the upper occlusal plane, is an imaginary line connecting all the tips of all the upper teeth. And the same on the lower, that's called the mandibular occlusal plane, all the tips of the lower teeth. And and the front part of the anterior part of that plane has another name that's often used called the incisal plane. And the incisals are from cuspid to cuspid, basically here. So on the upper right photo that you see, the top of the photo, you'll see the nose that will drop down. And my three arrows don't point to individual teeth. They point to the plane, the incisal plane. And what I would like to point out to everybody is that incisal plane does not run vertically with all those striations. It actually stops where it should. Let's drop down to the lower right so we don't have to be bothered by the arrows. So, Guy, you can point out the incisal plane on the lower. Those, if we consider those the tips of the lower anterior teeth, they are exactly where they should be anatomically. If we were to measure from the tip of the nose to those teeth and to the chin, et cetera, it's an excellent anatomical model of correctly spaced teeth and other facial structures. And what makes me excited about it is that as we go superiorly and we meet that incisal plane, those teeth disappear. And what we have is a dark oval. I believe that that oval is the oral cavity. I can't prove it, but I do believe it. And we don't know the mechanism that put the image on the cloth. But somehow or another, obviously, when we go to the negative, when you go to the cloth, for something to be dark on the photo negative, it would have to be lighter on the cloth. So I think we'll just go ahead and talk about the photo negative since we don't know the mechanism. I think several people, I'm one of them, Dr. Fonti and I have talked about some possibilities of how the image might be formed, and we're looking into that. But I do feel that if that is the oral cavity, there is an upward boundary, a superior boundary to it. So I think that's where the tips of the upper teeth are. Now, why don't you see them as distinctly as the lower teeth? Because on the upper, if energy was coming from within the body, coming outward, it had to go through the teeth or capture the teeth. Then it would have to go through the lip. Then it would have to go through this thick mustache. So I do think that in dentistry, we call it a radiopacity. It's the whitish area at the superior border of that oval space. So I do think you can see a hint of upper teeth, but I do think that everything is anatomically correct, and I'm fairly excited about being able to say that. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. Well, I wanted you to be able to compare the three arrows pointing to the incisal plane on the lower, and this young lady, I think around 25 years old, smiling, and she has an obviously anatomically correct structures, and her mandibular or lower incisal plane is just like the man on the shrouds. It's in the same place. It looks almost identical to it. And I think on the shroud, I think the upper teeth and lower teeth are more widely separated. But if she were to drop her lower jaw downward, I think that would look comparable in many ways. And but anyway, we can go ahead and move on from there to the next slide. I threw this in here. Now this is a statue. Uh, Basically, it was a combination of two people. The sculptor was Pablo Eduardo from, I believe, Spain, and Gilbert Lavoie, who I think everybody in the Shroud community knows very well, worked together for a long period. I think it was a year or two, in which they took information, 3D information as well as all the information and anatomical information to create it. And the lips are very close together. I think I talked to Gil, and he said he thought that they were probably separated a tiny bit. But in reality, you might say, well, what importance is there if there's teeth that can be seen on the shroud? I think it's immense importance because the lips, according to most people, I think say they're closed or touching. I think Dr. Lavoie says they may be open to slide them out, but we can actually see close to anatomically correct lower anterior teeth, and they would be behind the lip. Now, how would a medieval forger ever get the idea to put the incisal plane in the exact location where it should be, and then draw some vertical lines to show lower anterior teeth? I think that's a far stretch in my mind. So Christ,
Right.
with the dimensions of the face of the man in the shroud, are actually anatomically correct in many ways. In fact, it's a beautiful, serene face of somebody that's been tortured. And we could get into the theology and the philosophical aspects of that, but I don't think there's time. So why don't we get off these slides and go back to our full
Absolutely.
basis? Can I
Yeah,
carry on with that idea of the occlusion a little bit with my model at this point?
absolutely. Yeah, please.
Okay. Well, I don't know how well you're going to see this, but every person trained in dentistry has one of these because you can go like this, right? You could actually anybody not trained in dentistry could buy one with the little wind up thing, right? And it goes
I
like
think
this.
every time I go to the dentist office, I see one or two of those.
That's right. Okay. Well, notice that when you look at it straight on, the back teeth are not splayed out to the side; they're hidden. And then we open the arch. So what Wenger showed was a very broad arch with the teeth way out laterally. They would never occlude or bite against the lower teeth. So the incisal plane, which we'll look at here, the lower incisal plane is right. If I put it up where my lower teeth are, it's right in the right place and anatomically quite correct. And what I like about it most of all is that I can say, yes, as we look at those lower anterior teeth, and if we look down at the roots, yes, you blend in with the vertical striations of the claw. But the big catch is as you go superiorly, there is a horizontal plane that totally interrupts the vertical striations. And that dark oval, which I'm calling the oral cavity, overtakes the striations, and you can see an
Right.
abrupt end where those teeth should end at the incisal plane. So now let's go ahead and say if the teeth were open a little bit, about a quarter of an inch or so, or somewhere in there. You notice the dark oval? I'll put my fingers there because you have to remember, we haven't talked about, and we don't need to go back, but on the facial image, we have the corners of the mouth, right? And so I'll use my fingers as the corners of the mouth. And so the corners of the mouth come in something like that. And that image doesn't look terribly different than the image of Vernon Miller's photograph. And then as you go
Yeah.
superior to the oral cavity, you notice how you pick up the biting edges of the upper teeth or the upper incisal edge. So I think we have a number of things that point to uh, the potential. We can't say fact or it's 100% conclusive, but there's certainly a strong indication that there are teeth on the shroud and they are anatomically correct.
Yeah, yeah, thank you for that. It's certainly very convincing as to, showing what might be the striations in the linen, number one, and then number two, the what you're calling the mandibular incisal plane. I noticed though on the pictures, just thinking out loud, I noticed on the images that the on top of the incisal plane, it's a little bit brighter right at the edge there. Any thoughts or why that would be? It seems like there's just a little bit brighter right there at the edge.
Well, I've been talking to Giulio Fonti, and he has some ideas on that. He has as you know, he is very into the
Mm,
potentiality. That's all we can call it. Is the corona discharge as being the mechanism, and he has some theories on that, but we're in the very beginning stages of putting together a paper that might delineate your answer. So I don't want
yeah.
to speculate. I actually sent Julio an email yesterday and said, "Do you mind if I speculate?" He said, "I think you probably better not. We have a long way to go."
Yeah, that's true. Well, and the other thing I was thinking as you were talking is it's possible that the cloth wraps around the face, and then when it kind of, flattens out as to what we see, that would potentially make the back teeth more visible. Have you thought about that at all?
Well, that's a good question because one of as the cloth wraps around the faith, we don't have the there's a word for it. It's an Egyptian. There was an Egyptian king who had a mask made,
Agamemnon.
right?
Yep.
Yeah, there you go.
Agamemnon.
Thank you
Yep.
for
Yep.
throwing that out there. And so if I were to put let me make believe I put all kinds of paint on my face, right? And I take a linen cloth and I wrap it around my face like this, and I capture the surface details of all everything on my face, and I open it up, my face is going to be wide, very, very wide. So I believe that a lot of people think whatever energy caused the image to appear was vertically collimated. And so therefore, if you say those teeth could be there because the cloth wrapped around them and captured it, I have a hard time with that
Hmm.
because there are too many other places where that effect is not taking place, and you really do see a vertical columnation, columnization culmination of the of energy in a sense or imagery coming out, forming the image straight on. I had a,
Yeah.
I was I had I had dinner with Father Andrew Dalton a couple of nights ago, and we discussed some of this. And you may have attended his talk at the conference. He gave a talk on why don't we see the sides of Christ on the image, and he thinks that they may have stuffed 100 pounds of aloe and myrrh all along the sides and blocking the image type thing.
Hmm.
But if it's truly a vertical collimation of if he's lying, Christ is lying down, and there's a cloth on top of him, and the energy is going up vertically, then you're not going to see the sides, the image of the side of the body is the way I look at it. But I got involved in this guy intently about 3 months ago. So you're talking about somebody you probably have 20 to 30 or more years of experience. How many?
No, I've been looking at it for maybe 25 years, but really got intensely into it about 5 years ago, and as I
Okay.
was writing my book and stuff like that. So I'm
Well,
nowhere near 40 years with Joe Marino or Father Dalton. And it's funny because I just did an interview with him a couple days ago as well, and so
oh, what a
I didn't
treat.
even put the two together that you and he and Nora Creech, and then the new museum is out there.
Right. Yeah. Nora Creech is only a mile or two from my house is where she lives. And so the other Father Dalton is in our neighborhood quite often, and I haven't gone up to the Shroud Center in Southern California up there, up the Christ Cathedral and Father Spitzer. I'm all excited about that too. So no, I really just in love with the whole thing. And if now would be a good time, I'd like to mention a little bit about my book
Yeah, absolutely. So you wrote your
because
book called Mortal Adhesion. So tell us
I'm going to
about
go
that,
ahead and
definitely.
I'm going to go ahead and hold it up. And the reason for that is basically it's my story and how did I go from a scientific agnostic, in a sense disbeliever, or I didn't I believed in some sort of higher power because I turned to it, but I would not call myself a Christian in the beginning or when I was in my career at the heights of my career. But that's thank you to Dr. Gus Aceta for setting up that Shroud Center in Southern California. It's interesting because now Father Spitzer and that whole big center is right close by of where the original Shroud Center in Southern California. It changed my life, and where I got more involved, other things happened. And my book goes through a whole bunch of different things, but in reality, it gets down to the shroud. It goes into detail of my visit to the Turin Cathedral. Just again, divine intervention or pure luck for me to be over in Europe and to be able to have such an experience. And I didn't have to put up with just the 4 minutes of walking by. I got a full hour, and I looked at, I every day I did surgery when I was in the office and I knew exactly what oral blood looks like flowing. And it captured my attention. There's blood on that shroud. I mean, I didn't see any painting. I mean, to me, it was blood on a shroud.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. It's funny. I have not seen the shroud myself yet. I've seen obviously replicas, and I was at the Museum of the Bible, and they had a beautiful replica. And
right,
you talked about how when you're sitting in front of the shroud, it just kind of overtakes your whole mental state. And that's exactly what happened to me. I was sitting in front of it at the Museum of the Bible and just looking at it, and that serenity and I don't know, I don't even know how you describe all the feelings that come over you, but
totally
there are
agree.
so many. Yeah, yeah.
And they've lasted for me. I mean, they've lasted 25 years, and I still have this warmth in my heart for the shroud. Because normally I wouldn't just fly to St. Louis and go to the 3 day meeting. I just buy a book or go on the internet and watch videos. But something drew me to St. Louis. Something introduced me to Joe Marino. There's no doubt about
Yeah,
it.
yeah. How funny. Well, Joe
And
is
now you, and now I've met a wonderful person like you. I'm really excited about that.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I got to know Joe, and now he and I are on the board of the STIRP, which is now called STERA. We've kind of taken over some of the artifacts and things that Barry Schwartz had, and but he is such a great guy, and I'm so glad that he got to know you, to give you that godly nudge that said, "Hey, write something up on the teeth." And it really makes a lot of sense. I mean, what you pointed out when I was looking at it, you're right. You see those vertical striations,
I call it
and
striations, right? That's
yeah,
right.
yeah, and whether those are pareidolia or whatever they are, you could almost say, yeah, it looks like teeth. But now that you've kind of explained what's there, I could easily be convinced that those are not teeth. That you do see that incisal plane there. You do see the kind of the mouth opening. And, I'm wondering too, if you can't see teeth, then, and you can only see kind of like the edges of things or where as Giulio Fanti says, the holy fire, or that I can't remember what the term is that he uses, but the holy fire that
Holy
causes the
fire. It's good.
yeah, and if that is the mechanism, then you would really not be able to see teeth. You would not be able to see bones or anything. You would just be able to see how the skin, is closer to the cloth or further away from the cloth. So it'll be
Well, he has his
interesting.
ideas. I don't know them all, and I don't want to expound on them. But I did mention to him. I said, well, something formed that oral cavity. Would the corona discharge uh, theory help define how that happened? And he said, yes, I think it does. So, as I say, we're in the beginning of writing a paper, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, well, definitely, I want to read that when you get done because
Yes.
one thing that and I would, we were both at that conference, and it just sparks your curiosity in so many different directions, and there's so many different experts like yourself that bring, your background, your 40 years of background, and say, here's something where I can add value, or here's, something over here. And all of that coming together is just phenomenal. It really, really is.
Oh, great. I hope there's
Yeah.
another conference in the not too distant future. I'm getting old enough where I can't start looking 10 or 20 years down the road.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, give us a couple of years and we'll have some
Okay.
time to hopefully put together the next one. But yeah, well, John, that was really great. I'm really just so impressed with what you've done, and being able to see then what truly is right in that one area there. And certainly there is no proof. But there's certainly evidence that of what we're talking about, is whether it's teeth or no teeth, or the incisal plane or the oral cavity. That makes so much sense, and I really appreciate it. So thank you for being on today. If people want to reach out to you, is there any way that they could reach you? Or
Yeah, I think the best way is to go to my website, Mortal Adhesions, one word, no dot between them, mortaladhesions.com. Mortal Adhesions, I titled the book that because I became so enamored with accumulating material wealth and possessions and deadly sins. And I finally found Christ and changed my life, and I'm a much happier person.
well, that's
And so
so
go to mortaladhesions.com, go to contact page, and they'll have my actual email address, and you'll easily be able to get in touch with me. And also,
fantastic.
I've now got a lot of YouTube videos out there. I got one that, it's not totally, I mentioned the shroud, but I just did it 4 weeks ago on a podcast called The Cordial Catholic. And in 4 weeks, we have 82,000 views.
Wow.
And, and I talk about the shroud. Not a lot, but I do talk about
Yeah.
it for sure. Big part
That's
of my life.
awesome. Wow, that is a big that's a lot of views. It's hard to get that far. Fantastic. Well, congratulations, and congratulations certainly on your book, mortaladhesions.com, mortaladhesions.com. And then for the audience, definitely stay tuned for many other videos in this series of the backstory on the Shroud of Turin. And if you'd like to, please go to guypowell.com and sign up for more episodes. Thank you very much, and John, thank you so much for your knowledge and wisdom on that one area of the shroud.
Thank you, Guy. I really admire all you're doing. You give it such a positive energy, so keep it up.
Thank you so much.